Welcome to the Anxiety Connection. If you've ever struggled with anxiety and are ready to finally get some answers, you've come to the right place. Hi, my name is Wendy Leeds, and I've suffered with anxiety my entire life. Thankfully, I'm also a psychotherapist, and over the years, I've learned a lot about anxiety, where it comes from, and how to manage it. That's what this podcast is all about. So, let's grab a cup of tea and talk about it. I'm so glad you're joining us here at the Anxiety Connection. And I'm excited about what we're going to talk about today because I am finally going to get some answers to questions I've had forever. Today, we're going to share a conversation between an anxious person, that would be me, and a world-class expert on what it's like to live with someone who has anxiety. And that's my husband, Tim. We're going to talk about what it's like to be anxious. And we're also going to talk about the other side of that anxiety equation, what it's like to live with someone who has anxiety. We're going to have an honest conversation about how my anxiety impacts our lives and our relationships. And we're also going to talk about some of the ways we deal with that anxiety, what works for us, and probably we'll get to some things that don't work for us. So if you're anxious like I am, and you've always wondered how that anxiety affects your partner, what it's like on the other side of the anxiety fence, so to speak, because I've always wondered. And if you live with someone who's anxious, I hope we're going to give some perspective today on what it's like to either live with anxiety or to live with someone who has it. So let me get started by, first of all, thanking Tim for joining me and saying how lucky I am to have married such a fabulous human being. Now, let me share, Tim is a very calm person, but maybe you're not feeling so calm about being on a podcast.
Well, thank you for that introduction and introducing me to the audience. Mm-hmm. I never imagined that I would be on a podcast, but I'm here to support this discussion about anxiety and what it's like living with an anxious person. And that person is you. I'm generally a calm person.
Yeah.
But I am feeling a little nervous about being on this podcast because I do not usually put myself in front of an audience. Right. It makes me a little anxious. So we'll see how this all goes.
All right, let me start by asking you, does my anxiety make you nervous?
Well, yes, it does.
Sorry.
And that's because I don't really understand what it is that makes you anxious.
Right.
And sometimes what I try to do is collect some data points or identify a point of reference, which helps me understand what has you all spun up.
Yeah.
What we try to do is talk through issues that affect you and me.
Yeah.
I look for ways to smooth your anxiety. Sometimes I tell you to breathe deep, let it out, and carry on.
Yes.
I think that communication between people is important.
Yes.
I think it is a good outlet for an anxious person.
No question about it. And before I go any further, I just want to talk a little bit about how your calmness helps me stay calm. You really are my anchor in the storm. Thank you. In the middle of a crisis, your calm voice and your steady reaction keeps me grounded. And I just want to share that you actually won an award for being the steady hand on the wheel at work. And you are the steady hand on the wheel. You often, as you said, you say, breathe deep, and you remind me of what is true, not the scary, hairy stories that I tell myself. You remind me that this is really what's happening. And I'll share honestly, I used to find it really hard when you traveled because I was so anxious about what would happen to you out in the world. You remember that?
Oh, yes, I remember.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's difficult leaving the family behind, but it never occurred to me that you would really be anxious about it.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I get home, you'd say, "Oh, I'm so glad you're home."
I am, because
Yeah, because it's
I
been
worry.
lonely here, and
Yes,
you worry.
I do.
You did worry about me while I
lot.
was traveling.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Can you share how my anxiety affects you?
Well, I think that the anxiety that you express or that is in your life, I think what it does is it helps build a stronger bond between you and me. I listen to what you have to say,
You're a good listener. You are a good listener.
and you are not shy about sharing what's bothering you.
I am an excellent sharer.
I think being open
Yeah.
and sharing is important
So
for you to ease your anxiety.
right.
You share what's causing your anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
When you share,
Mm-hmm.
I have a reference point for understanding what triggers your anxiety.
Right.
Talking through the circumstances that cause you to be anxious helps us both maintain an open line of communication.
Yes.
Neither of us feels shut out of the other's lives.
Right.
I guess you could say it gives balance to our relationship.
Well, balance, okay. But I loved what you just said, because I think communication is critical to any relationship. But I think it's even more important if you're like me and you're anxious. I'm going to speak from the anxious side of the relationship. And for us anxious people, we often either don't know how to speak up or we're afraid to speak up because it's really hard. I know it's hard to admit that you're struggling. And it's hard to admit, at least for me, that I'm not perfect and I might need some support or help. And very often we suffer in silence, hoping or expecting that our partner's just going to sort of magically know what we need. But they're not mind readers, are you? You're not a mind
No,
reader.
I haven't learned that skill yet.
Not yet. So if you're anxious, it's really important to speak up. And you can start by saying, it's really hard for me to go to your office party because I'm not comfortable in a social situation. Or I would rather take the stairs because I get nervous in elevators, and Tim is smiling because I have an issue with escalators, but that's for another podcast. If you're anxious, it's really important in this relationship to ask for help, ask for support, ask for what you need. And if you're on the other side of the fence, you wonderful, unanxious folk, please, 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 and you never do this, but please don't tell us to just get over it. Don't tell us not to be afraid. Don't tell us we aren't afraid, because it's like saying to someone with a broken leg, oh, just go ahead and walk, you'll be fine. Here's the truth about us anxious people. At least I know my anxiety does not make sense. It doesn't make sense to you sometimes.
It doesn't make sense to me.
Uh-huh.
Maybe to other anxious people, it makes sense.
I think that's probably true. It may look crazy. I can't explain it, but here's the truth. We anxious people, our anxiety is real. It's physical. It's tough to deal with. It can be such a struggle to some mornings just get out of bed. It is so difficult to wrestle anxiety to the ground. And once you get it there, it can pop up when you least expect it. If you're anxious, I bet you know what I'm talking about. So that's my side of the equation. And that's the unanxious side of the equation. Tim, what are you thinking about that?
Having hung out with you for so long over all these years,
Yes.
I think being helpful to someone who's anxious is a lot more effective than being dismissive of someone's need for sharing and their need to be understood.
Yes.
When anxiety does rear its ugly head.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I consider myself a fairly calm person.
Oh, yes.
And that can be a helpful asset when addressing someone else's anxiety. It can provide an outlet. It's also an opportunity to share and talk through issues that brought the anxiety to the surface.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Sometimes, if I understand what triggered the anxiety, I can step in and intercept it or fend it off.
You're right.
Or at least try to lessen the impact of the anxiety.
Yeah.
If I can help make your life easier, then I can make my life easier.
Yes. If mama ain't happy, nobody's happy. And that is so powerful and so great. If you are unanxious people, I would just hear that. It is so wonderful to have a support system like that in place to help us anxious people manage our triggers. And maybe this is a conversation that the anxious and unanxious could have about how best to support each other, because every relationship is different, and what works really well for us may not work for you, and that's okay. That's okay. It's what is important is that you talk it out and you come to a place where you both have an understanding. And I want to thank you because you really do a good job at that.
You're welcome.
And I also want to say while I'm here on some of the positive aspects of being anxious, and you're looking at me like I'm nuts, but there are some positive things. I believe we who have anxiety have uncommon courage, because some days it is so tough just to take on the day. Having anxiety is no picnic. And so I believe that it makes us braver and stronger. Also, and I don't know if Tim is going to think this is a good thing, a positive thing, but having anxiety makes me be more organized. I feel better when I know how the day is going to look. So I'll say things like, at 9:30, here's what I'm going to do. And at 8:47 and at 1:15, I plan out the day. And I know other people handle anxiety differently, but I love to be organized and have a schedule. So how is that to live with? Uh-oh.
Well, I'm not always on board with living with a rigid schedule.
That's true.
Although it can be helpful at times.
Yeah.
But I understand why you do this to manage your anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
It's important to get things done.
Yeah.
Like to get that monkey off your back. You just have to get it done.
Mm-hmm.
I think order and control are helpful tools.
Right.
In an anxious person's life.
Yes.
But not too much, when the other person might rebel.
No. But here's a place where when you sit and talk about it, you see the other side of the equation, and you find a place in the middle. So I'm going to ask you, I'm going to put you on the spot. Can you think of any other positive aspects for living with someone with anxiety?
Positive aspects?
Yeah.
I don't know. That's a deep question. But I think with you having anxiety, or anybody with anxiety, the person you're with, it gives you all a chance to do different things in life,
Mm-hmm.
to find distractions from the world around you.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
When you start feeling the walls closing in, for example, or when there are too many demands on your time or energy, I can see you getting antsy.
Right. Yeah. This is for us.
So what I generally do is I throw Wendy into our van, and we go for a long drive.
That's not the way it sounds.
It's not, yes.
I go willingly.
She goes willingly. It's not a kidnapping.
No.
And what we do is we take in the scenery, and we drive to locations where we haven't been before.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just exploring. It's just getting away, getting out of the house.
Mm-hmm.
It's a distraction.
Right.
Now we have our dog Miles.
Yes.
And it's easy to get out of the house with Miles because he needs to go for a walk and get exercise.
Right.
And he needs to run and get out there, and Wendy and I need to do that also.
Yes.
So we usually do this like 3 times a day.
Mm-hmm.
And so that, I think, helps as a distraction, and just brings fresh air into our bodies, and
Mm-hmm.
gives us a chance to let our minds wander a little bit.
Mm-hmm. And to get into touch with each other.
So getting out of the house is good medicine for most people, as it is for us.
I agree. Of course, this isn't for everybody. If you're isolating or you're unable to leave your home, you're going to want to find a different kind of distraction. And this is another conversation you can have with your partner. You can talk about, gee, when I'm anxious, maybe I need to bake bread or call a friend or make a jigsaw puzzle, although that can be
anxiety producing, especially if you're missing a couple of pieces.
Yes, we know how.
And we've done that before.
We have. But anyway, I'm hoping that you're thinking about a conversation that you could have with your partner about how to find this place in the middle. So I'm going to ask you, Tim, do you have any advice to offer someone who's living with someone else who's anxious?
Okay, well, let's see. I think if you can find distractions from the daily routine, like creating a list of things to do or different ideas of distracting yourself, direct your attention away from the anxiety-inducing issues of the moment or the day.
Yep.
Like watch a movie.
Yep.
Listen to music, do a craft, or do that annoying crossword jigsaw puzzle. But I think those are some thoughts about living with the anxious person.
And can I add in that you listen really well?
Yeah, I do that pretty well.
You are a really good listener. And I think that's number one on my list of things I'm grateful for in our relationship. All right. So now I'm going to risk it all. Do you have any questions for me?
Well, I think what I'd like to know is, where did your anxiety come from? What's the basis of your anxiety? Because I never saw you as an anxious person when we were back in college. And that's how far back we go, way back to college.
Yes.
And so I'm just kind of wondering.
Well, no one really knows where anxiety comes from. It's still and I think for different people, the answer may be different things. I come from a really anxious family, and maybe it's genetic. Maybe it's lifestyle. The answer is, I don't exactly know, but I've always been anxious. It's just who I am. And as I've shared, I was in my 30s before I realized that everybody else wasn't anxious too, because my family was so anxious. And I would say to you, aren't you anxious? And you would say,
No. What do I have to be anxious about? Life is great.
I realized after, some years of living with you that not everybody was walking around feeling dread and anxiety all the time. So for me, I think maybe what we weren't recognizing was I didn't know what to call the feeling I had. Anyway, anything else you want to share before I wrap up?
But the only thing I think is that you and I have a great relationship. I think we're well balanced.
Okay.
I'm the calm one in the relationship most of the time.
Yes.
I can have my moments of anxiety, but they're few and far between.
Yes.
But generally, I'm the calming influence in our relationship.
You are. And that's a wonderful thing. But it doesn't just happen. We have talked this out. We've worked it out over the years. We have come to understandings. And I think that is really the critical piece. And if you don't have a partner, you might want to look for someone in your life who might serve as a support system. Really important to reach out. Let me end by saying, we all struggle with things in life. We're all dealing with stuff. Anxiety is no different. I think the secret to any long-term relationship is the way you talk to each other with respect, kindness, a generous sense of compassion, and in our case, we laugh a lot. It's really important to listen, and I mean really listen. And I love the way Tim listens. He really repeats back what I've said, and if he doesn't understand, he asks me to clarify it. And we talk it out until we find a place where we both can be winners. If you found this episode helpful and you're working to communicate better with your partner or looking to create a support system for yourself, why not ask someone else to listen to this podcast, either with you or on their own? Maybe it will help them better understand what you're going through, or at least it will give you both a place to start a conversation that can begin to support you both. I'm so glad you were here today at The Anxiety Connection. If you like this podcast, please subscribe. And until we're together again, I wish you peace, joy, and love.